Hi, everyone. It's Nicole with Aurelian Coaching. It is Thursday. It's noon-ish, noonish. Okay, so Aurelian Coaching Weekly. I'm happy that you're able to join. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership communication. Why not just communication? Why leadership communication? And this is why. Because good leaders have a way of communicating that is super effective and super efficient. And for leaders who communicate well, I was really interested in dissecting what the method was that they used to get their point across with clarity, make it actionable, and not waste everybody's time with it, least of all theirs, right? And the one platform that I want to talk about is email in particular. Now, I've written about email before, so you can go to my blog at aureliancoaching.com, and there's a really good post about just generally how to use email effectively and not just use it as a default for all communications. Like, please don't do that. But in this particular topic, how leaders use email effectively for communication. This came up because in some of my presentations around communication and some of my group coaching, I will ask this question, give me a show of hands of people who use email for work. You have to use email to communicate. Of course, everybody raises their hand. And I say, well, keep your hand up if you enjoy it. If you enjoy email, if you like it and like to use it and find it effective, and of course, everybody's hands come down. And this is really unfortunate, right? I mean, that we don't like using this thing that we must use in our jobs. And so the question became, well, how do we get better at it? And I looked to a number of people that I considered leaders in how they communicated via email. And then I also took a poll. So just during my regular networking, week in and week out, when I'm talking to accomplished professionals, I asked them, how do you communicate via email? How do you use it? If you believe somebody is a really good leader in communication and uses email well, how do they format their emails? And so I got a lot of really good information, and I have 3 tips. And this is something that surprisingly very, very easy, not complicated at all. But I think because people just use email as a default for everything, and gosh, when you open up an email, sometimes people just purge and they write and write and write and write. So we got to stop doing that, right? This is a way that leaders use email communication very effectively, very efficiently. So I want to share that with you. And it doesn't matter what your title is, by the way, right? So you can, and even when I was coming up the ranks and I was watching how leaders use email, I was like, well, the higher up in the organization somebody went, the shorter and shorter and shorter their emails were. And they were no less effective. But I thought, well, why can't we all just use that methodology? We can replicate that no matter where you are in the organization, right? We can all be more efficient and more effective at it. So this is a result of my own experience, a poll, informal polls and surveys that I've taken of other professionals, and what we've all collectively kind of observed. And the first of 3, is that the emails are directed to individuals. Leaders don't often send out group emails. Now, this is something that's interesting because I get a lot of pushback from people when I am coaching them through this topic. And they say, well, sometimes I just have to let everybody know something. And that is an assumption. That's a default assumption that people are using, that you have to tell everybody this one thing. Probably not. I always challenge that assumption. And I find when I talk to other accomplished professionals and other leaders, they make it a point to direct their communications to an individual or to 2 or 3 individuals, and they don't send out mass emails unless it's like for a potluck. Okay, but don't do that. Your email should start with hi Jane or hi Bob. It shouldn't be hey everybody. Don't do that. Okay, be very thoughtful about who you are directing the information to, and then send an email to just that person. All right, leadership communication tip number 2 is that really good leaders use the CC and BCC fields very sparingly and very strategically. Okay. When I started to move up the ranks, I had fewer and fewer emails directed to me as an individual, but I ended up being copied on everything. Everything under the sun had my name on the CC list. And I was like, what is happening? Listen, this is how you use the copy fields on an email. For the CC field, think about the people who need to know the information in order to do their jobs. That is the criteria for including somebody on the CC list. Do they need this information in order to do their jobs? Because once you get to the point where you're copying people just as an FYI, it ends up being clutter. Clutter in their inbox, clutter in your outbox, clutter in their minds, clutter in their to-do lists, because it's like, well, I'm copied on it. Am I responsible for any of it? You only copy people if it's important for them to do their jobs. Now, BCC gets a little bit trickier, right? Here's the thing that I want you to keep in mind, and that leaders keep in mind when they're blind copying people. And that is that the person on the BCC list knows in advance that they're going to be copied on something. They know about the issue, and they know why it's important that they're blind copied on it, which means that you need to do some setup. You need to have a conversation with these people and not randomly blind copying them on things. Okay, so send them a separate email, again, directed just to the individual, or leave them a confidential voicemail so that they know it's coming, they know the context, they understand what they need to do or not need to do about it, and you have a conversation, you set that up. Okay. All right, here's the last thing. That leaders follow a very short and sweet formula for the content of the email, the body of the email. Usually it can be in like 3 sentences. And what those 3 sentences are is what the guidance is or the instruction, right? Number 2 is why. They're providing rationale. And number 3 is usually there's some sort of consequence, right? So if a leader is actually providing an individual with instruction or guidance, a lot of times what gets left off the email is what happens if it doesn't get done. And I'm not talking about big consequence like if you don't do this, your job is at stake or anything like that. That's not what I mean. What I mean is if this doesn't happen, there is something downstream, either in the project or as an additional burden on somebody, in fulfilling their job duties that then needs to happen if this doesn't get done. So you're providing context, and you're bringing the communication, you're elevating it from just do this thing to we do this thing, and here's why, and here's what happens if it doesn't. Okay, if it doesn't occur. And what happens when people leave out the consequence is that there are assumptions about what can happen if the instruction or guidance isn't followed. And in so many organizations, so interesting, in so many organizations, the assumption is, well, somebody else will do it. Somebody else will do it. Literally, that's what people assume, or that somebody else will just help me later, right? And a lot of times what happens, especially in mid-level management, is that the mid-level managers take on the burden of things that are not completed by other people. That is not the answer to this, my friends, right? So leaders understand that in their communications, when they're giving guidance, that not only do they explain the rationale for why this needs to happen, but they say the consequence of this is you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z as an alternative. Not, I'm going to help you out later, or I will just do it later, or, something terrible and extreme. The consequence is if you don't do this thing, you will have to figure out another solution later. And that solution later is usually a burdensome thing. It's not a good alternative, right? So that's a very nice formula: instruction and guidance plus the rationale plus a consequence. And it's super clear, it's to the point, it's effective. You always want to be respectful in your email communication, so that's kind of a given. But use this formula and see if it works for you. I've recently coached somebody through doing this, and she's changed all of her communications as a result of it. And everybody noticed. Everybody noticed that her emails were getting super short, but they were so clear and so direct. And people had fewer follow-ups. They weren't hitting reply and saying, well, what do you mean by this? And they weren't, things were just happening a lot more efficiently as a result of her following this formula. So those are the 3 tips for leadership communication, specifically with email. But I think you'll find that if you apply these strategies through any kind of communication, whether it's networking or pitching or, on calls or teleconferences, it doesn't just have to be email. You will take these methods that lots of you leaders have used and that other people have appreciated about their communication, and you can see some of those positive results as well. So I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions, contact me through my Facebook page or online through the website, aureliancoaching.com, and I'd love to continue the conversation. Okay, have a great day, guys.